Relative superiority on the battlefield is defined as the moment a smaller attacking force gains a decisive advantage over a larger, better defended adversary through a combination of training, speed, and surprise. In June 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion against Iran and achieved relative superiority in a short amount of time, as Iran's defenses were rendered ineffective. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a look at Operation Rising Lion, the preparation, the execution, and the end result. The October 7, 2023 attack by Hamas inside Israeli territory led to the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad receiving a lot of flack for a massive intelligence failure. Mossad conducted a retrospective and realized that its failure had been partly due to an over-reliance on technical intelligence gathering rather than traditional espionage methods. And when it came to Iran, with a lot of its agents on the ground, Mossad had definitely been following the traditional methods of espionage. Israel had always been suspicious of Iran's nuclear intentions, and starting in 2007, several of Iran's nuclear scientists were assassinated over the course of the next 5 years. Iran became suspicious of Mossad's involvement in these assassinations and tried to hunt for the Israeli agents in Iran, but did not get any major breakthroughs. And then on January 31, 2018, Mossad agents pulled off the espionage heist of the decade. In a meticulously planned and executed operation that lasted 6.5 hours, Mossad agents infiltrated a secret warehouse in Tehran and stole a trove of nuclear documents. When I say trove, I mean 50,000 paper documents and 55,000 pages of digital files stored on 183 CD-ROMs. Whoa, wait. The Mossad agents were inside the warehouse for 6.5 hours and were not found out? Where were the Iranians? Sleeping? Technically, yes. After the 2015 Iran nuclear deal between Iran and the United States, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, got access to declared nuclear facilities in Iran. So to prevent IAEA from getting access to the documents around its nuclear weapons development program, Iran moved these documents to a warehouse in Tehran's Shorabad industrial district to conceal them. But what the Iranians did not know was that Mossad was on their tail since the signing of the agreement. And as the Iranians started moving the documents, Mossad initiated the process of documenting and filming all of this. And in 2017, Mossad started planning the heist. With inside help, Mossad was able to monitor this facility very closely and realize that it was not guarded 24/7. Why? Because the Iranians did not want to raise any suspicions within the team of the IAEA inspectors. So the Israeli spies had a window between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. to enter the warehouse, steal the documents, and get away. Now, in most Mossad operations, the spies aim to penetrate a facility and photograph or copy material without leaving any trace. But in this case, Mossad decided to steal the material outright, and this was done for two reasons. One, to shorten the time spent inside the building, and two, the Israelis did not want to leave any room for speculation that the stolen material was fake or forged. Through inside help, the Israelis spent time to understand which of the 32 safes inside the warehouse held the most important information, the daily routine of the workers, and the workings of the alarm system so it could be disabled during the heist. So on January 31st, 2018, the Mossad agents arrived at the warehouse at 10:30 p.m. local time with torches that burned at least 3,600 degrees, which was hot enough to cut through the safes that held the critical documents. And per the plan, the agents were able to leave the warehouse by 5 a.m. and escape with this massive trove of documents and CD-ROMs, most likely from the coast, which was just a few hours' drive from Tehran. The guards arrived at 7 a.m. and were shocked to discover the theft. They immediately raised the alarm, and Iran immediately launched a nationwide campaign to locate the burglars, and this included tens of thousands of Iranian security and police personnel. But this was all futile because the Israelis had already escaped. The Iranians stayed tight-lipped about this incident, and it was only about 3 months later, in April of 2018, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the results of the heist after giving President Trump a private briefing at the White House. And it was primarily because of this burning evidence that President Trump, a few days later, pulled out of the Iran-US nuclear deal. With this heist, Iran's entire nuclear blueprint was laid bare before the West. The documents detailed the challenges of integrating a nuclear weapon into a warhead for the Shahab-3 Iranian missile. The Israelis also had in their possession pictures taken inside what were once key nuclear facilities in Iran before the equipment was dismantled to prepare for the IAEA inspectors. And these pictures gave key insights into the location of various nuclear facilities within Iran. Nuclear facilities like proposed sites for possible underground nuclear tests. But Iran's nuclear program had been under the scrutiny of Israel, US, and its allies since the time of President George W. Bush. When President Bush left office, he urged the incoming President Barack Obama to continue Operation Olympic Games, which was a campaign of sabotage through cyber disruption directed at Iranian nuclear facilities by the US and Israel. The primary target was Iran's nuclear jewel, the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility near Tehran. Programmers at the National Security Agency and the Israeli military wrote a beacon program that could map out the workings of the Natanz nuclear plant. And with insider help, this program was introduced into a controller computer at the Natanz plant. And once the information about the operations within the plant was collected and fed back to the NSA by the beacon program, the NSA programmers got busy designing a complex worm that would disrupt the plant. Once again, the new worm program was introduced into the plant's computer controllers through insider help. So how did it disrupt the operation of the centrifuges? Well, to an extent, it was quite comical. In some cases, the program made the centrifuges run too fast, and in others, it made them run too slow. This unbalanced operation caused the centrifuges to explode. Nearly a fifth of the centrifuges operating were disabled via the cyber attack. And it took the Iranians some time to figure out that this was actually part of a cyber attack. By late 2010, the US estimated that this operation had delayed Iran's progress towards nuclear weapons by a year and a half to 2 years. So with the success of the cyber attacks in 2010 and the nuclear documents heist in 2018, the Israelis realized that it was not very difficult to infiltrate Iran's regime and its administrative machinery. And one of the primary reasons for this ease of infiltration is that the Iranians have primarily trained their secret services for internal security risks. Being an authoritarian regime, The system is designed for internal repression and quelling internal protests, and these are deemed a higher priority over a foreign attack. Also, with an authoritarian regime in place, because of a lack of accountability, corruption tends to be rampant. And this was another factor that Israel exploited to infiltrate the Iranian establishment. The interesting piece is that the Iranians knew that the Israelis had infiltrated Iran. But due to rampant corruption, inefficiencies, and a general distrust across intelligence agencies, the Iranians were unable to defeat this operation. In a 2024 interview with CNN Turk, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, claimed that the head of Iran's counterintelligence, tasked with finding Mossad operatives, was himself an Israeli agent. So Israel had even infiltrated Iran's intelligence machinery. And this created a massive environment of paranoia within Iran's intelligence community. Now, Iran has two main intelligence agencies: the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, or MOIS, and the Intelligence Organization of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. With Israel's infiltration, these two agencies became very distrustful of each other, and Israel exploited that to the hilt. In plain sight, months before the start of Operation Rising Lion, Mossad agents established a drone factory on Iranian soil near the capital Tehran. Whoa, this is ridiculous. A drone factory set up by Israel inside Iranian territory? How could Iranians miss it? Well, most likely, both intelligence agencies felt the other had set up this drone factory and decided against raising any questions for fear of retaliation. And this factory was used to assemble drones in Iran from parts smuggled by Israeli agents into Iran. And these parts were smuggled into Iran via trucks, shipping containers, and even suitcases. Israel's primary objective now was to destroy Iran's capability to make nuclear weapons, but go a little beyond and eliminate all manpower behind the nuclear plans. That meant top military generals and nuclear scientists were now in Israel's sight. So agents were deployed on the ground to track these individuals, identify and understand their patterns so they could easily identify their location and even influence their movement when the time came. With its espionage operations on Iranian soil in full force, Israel was just looking for an opportunity to get the clearance to strike Iran. That opportunity presented itself on June 12, 2025, when the International Atomic Energy Agency, that is IAEA, declared that Iran was in breach of its non-proliferation obligations for the first time in 20 years. So on June 13, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion with the primary objective of destroying Iran's nuclear capability. The interesting piece here is that Iran was not expecting this attack from Israel. Why? Because they had been in negotiations with the US about Iran's nuclear program. But what Iran did not realize is that though they were in negotiations with the US, the negotiations had essentially reached a stalemate. Now, Iran is quite a distance from Israel. Israel's fighter jets had to transition Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia before they could enter Iranian territory. So the Israelis needed to make sure that when their jets entered Iranian territory, they completed their mission without any resistance or counterattacks from Iran. And this was accomplished by disabling the HIMARS surface-to-air missiles across Iran via FPV drones and NLAWS missiles. So inside of Iran, Mossad and Israeli military had established these drone and missile cells right next to each surface-to-air missile site. Essentially, the drones and the NLAWS missiles were concealed in trucks, trailers, and other vehicles which were parked right next to each of these missile sites. The NLAWS missile is a precision-guided missile which is designed to strike targets that are not directly visible from the missile's launch location. The missile uses infrared or electro-optical sensors to guide itself to its target when the target is obscured by a terrain or other obstacles. The Israelis seem to have taken a page out of Ukraine's playbook from Operation Spiderweb that destroyed at least a dozen of Russia's strategic bombers deep inside the Russian territory. And the purpose of this drone and NLAWS missile operation was not to completely destroy the surface-to-air missile sites, because that would be very difficult, but to destroy their battery and radar systems so these sites could be disabled temporarily so the fighter jets could accomplish their mission without any missiles being launched at them. Once the drones and the NLAWS missile systems accomplished their mission, Stage 2 of Operation Rising Lion was launched, which entailed 40 Israeli F-35s jetting into Iranian territory and destroying the HIMARS surface-to-air missile sites. The F-35s have a much longer range, so were able to penetrate deep into Iranian territory, and once the surface-to-air missiles had been destroyed, they went further deep and struck the Natanz nuclear facility. Meanwhile, the next stage of the operation was launched, where a combination of F-16s and F-15s destroyed several radar sites which were close to the border using a combination of ARMs and AGMs. The ARM is an anti-radiation missile and is designed to detect and hone in on enemy radar signals, typically destroying the radar source or other emitters. And the AGM is an air-to-ground missile which gets launched from an aircraft and targets ground-based or surface-based threats. Now, the F-15s and the F-16s, because of their shorter travel range, had to be refueled before they hit their targets close to the border. Now, there wasn't any friendly country in the vicinity to land these jets for refueling, so they had to be refueled mid-air using 7 air-to-air Boeing 707 fuel tankers. Though the Israelis had about 6 F-16 escort planes, yet none of them were used because Iran was unable to scramble any jets to protect its airspace. With Iran's air defenses completely crippled, Israel was able to hit 3 nuclear sites by June 16: the Natanz, the Isfahan, and the Fordow nuclear sites. Satellite imagery proved that the Israeli strikes had been able to destroy the above-ground structures of the Natanz nuclear facility. Primarily, the electricity that powers the underground centrifuges was knocked out. The centrifuges at Natanz are used to enrich uranium up to 60% purity, so the destruction of the power source was a significant damage. However, the Fordow nuclear facility was a far more difficult site to target. The plant is buried deep in the mountains near Qom in northern Iran. It houses advanced centrifuges which are used to enrich uranium up to high grades of purity. Iran knew that Israelis would not be able to hit Fordow, and when the Israelis realized this, they turned to the United States for help. Israel needed the United States to hit these nuclear facilities with its GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bombs, also known as bunker busters. So on June 22nd, 2025, a group of 7 B-2s flew a route over the Atlantic across the Mediterranean Sea into the Middle East. They were aided by a fleet of Pegasus aerial refuelers that had been positioned to support the long-distance round trip. Although Israel had already degraded the Iranian defense systems, the US still sent a group of fighters to hit some of the surface-to-air missile sites just to be doubly sure. Interestingly, the US also sent a separate group of B-2s in the westward direction as a decoy mission, and the primary purpose of this was to create a distraction and deceive the Iranian defenses so they could shift their focus away from the primary strike force. The Iranian defenses anyways did not react, and the B-2s dropped 14 bunker busters on the enrichment facilities at Natanz and Fordow. The bunker busters were able to do their job, but the general feeling within the nuclear community was that Iran's nuclear program had been pushed back between 6 months to a year. But why? The answer lay in Pickaxe Mountain. Pickaxe Mountain is an underground bunker in the mountains just minutes from the Natanz nuclear facility. And it houses a bulk of Iran's uranium stockpiles. Almost 900 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% purity has been unaccounted for since the start of the Operation Rising Lion. And it is believed that Iran may have been able to move its stockpile of enriched uranium into the Pickaxe Mountain before its nuclear installations got hit by the Israelis and the US B-2s. So did Operation Rising Lion achieve its objectives? Well, to some extent, it did slow down Iran's nuclear progress, but it was not able to halt it. However, its biggest success was on the political and the social front. The Iranian authoritarian regime experienced a massive credibility hit, and its incompetence and corruption were blatantly exposed. The fact that Israel was able to carry out assassinations of the top military generals and nuclear scientists with impunity instilled a fear in the administration that Israel was right there and watching them. Very similar to what Israel had achieved in Lebanon about a year ago when Hezbollah's pagers mysteriously exploded in September of 2024. In fact, the fear was so deep that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was hiding in a bunker, picking an array of replacements for himself and his chain of military command in case he himself and more of the military commanders were killed. And on that note, we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. What is the number one method of a cyber attack currently? Per the 2024 cybercrime statistics, 80% of cybercrimes are phishing attacks. So the answer is A, phishing. Question for the current episode. Bizarre but true. Israel once partnered with Iran to hurt a common enemy. When and for what operation did this partnership happen? Was it A, during the 1967 Six-Day Arab-Israeli War? B, 1973 Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War? C, 1981 bombing of Iraq's Osiris nuclear reactor? Or D, 1948 First Arab-Israeli War? Once again, Israel once partnered with Iran to hurt a common enemy. When and for what operation did this partnership happen? Was it A, the 1967 Six-Day Arab-Israeli War? B, the 1973 Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War? C, the 1981 bombing of Iraq's Osiris nuclear reactor? Or D, the 1948 First Arab-Israeli War? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. We meet again in 2 weeks with another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.